Good morning and welcome to Friday morning's keynote session at USA 2022. We are once again privileged to have an R-Core team member talk to the R community at large about happenings at R-Core. And it's our distinct pleasure to welcome for that Sebastian Meyer in a moment, who's the newest R team member. Just as a brief set of technical notes, we have allocated about 45 to 50 minutes for Sebastian, followed by possibly 10 minutes of question, after which we aim to have a 30-minute Q&A panel with three more R-Core members, Luke Tierney, Thomas Calibera, and Martin Mechel, who is apparently also somewhere here. My name is Dirk Edelbüttel. I'm an R Foundation board member, R contributor, software engineer, and part-time professor at University of Illinois. I've been working with R for 25 years and had the privilege of meeting many of our participants today at prior conferences, and I'm quite thrilled to be here. But with that, let me turn to welcoming Sebastian. Sebastian works as a research fellow at the University in Erlangen-Nürnberg, which the program had correctly spelled with an umlaut. He holds a PhD from the University of Zurich, which the program did not spell correctly with an umlaut or a UE, and that clearly shows why I got pulled in to chair this, because I would notice being umlauted myself. Sebastian is also an editor at the Journal of Statistical Software, and as of several months ago, now a member of the R-Core team. And he is, if you ever had the chance to encounter him online, just about the nicest person you can meet online. And now we even get to see him with audio and video. So I will cede the floor. And so please join me in welcoming Sebastian Meyer for his keynote.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk, very much for the introduction. I'll start to share my screen. Okay, so can you see that? Perfect. Okay, yeah, so I've prepared a slide to just tell a bit about myself, which Dirk already did, actually. But so I'm a statistician. I was trained at LMU in Munich, and so in Germany, but also for 1 year in France, and then did my PhD in Zurich, in the PhD program in epidemiology and biostatistics. And since 2016, I'm now at Erlangen, the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität here, and concerning my research, so I'm really doing mostly statistical methods for infectious disease surveillance data already since 2007, so since my BSc, my bachelor thesis. I know this does sound pretty bold nowadays, that research area, but I'm really just digging into very specific model classes for epidemic modeling of disease spread. And so this is not the topic of today's talk, be relieved. And with regard to base R, so I learned that in 2005, where we had R 2.1.0, and submitted my first bug report to Ars Bugzilla in 2011. And then since the beginning of 2020, I started to increase my activity in base R and started to review bug reports on the bug repository and discuss bugs, provide patches, and so on. And then I was actually invited to join R-Core, which I hadn't planned, but that happened. So maybe some of you know, because it was announced on the R-Announce mailing list, and I'm very happy to be part of that team now. I have a few words of thanks. There are 3 people in the core team with whom I had the most contact. So there's Kurt Honeck, Thomas Calibera, and Martin Mechler. These 3, but when I started to contribute, some members of the core team reacted after a while, and then we went into more email discussions and so on. And these three members of the core team were the most influential for me on my way to joining our core. I also want to thank the director of my institute, Olaf Gefeller, because he's giving me the freedom to just do a little bit of our development as a side project at work. That's not always easy, because working on R, base R, so you don't get academic credit for that. So there won't be papers just because you are fixing a small bug in R, and this takes a lot of time. But I can do that. As a side project, and also, of course, in my spare time. I also want to thank my two kids, mainly because they will be watching this video afterwards, but also because we on a weekend we programmed together a small game in R. I wanted to try if that is possible, and I was quite surprised that it's so easy to do that. Mostly thanks because there's a get graphics event function implemented by Duncan Murdoch a while ago, and so this is on GitLab, and I don't want to promote it, but just it's really very little code, and you can press the cursor, the arrow buttons on your keyboard, and navigate this monkey through this coordinate system and collect these pieces. And I was really surprised how easy that is. But I also acknowledge that there are really a lot of impressive projects, more sophisticated also, where people do kind of funny things in R. So here's the structure of my talk, and I think I won't take all the 40 minutes talking with my screen. So I'll start by summarizing news in the most recent major version of R, which is not quite correct, because today we have the release of R 4.2.1 already. And then in the second part, I'll show how you can contribute to base R, and also share some personal experiences with that, and present just a few selected bug stories. So first of all, how do you find out about what's new in R? So there is in R, there's a function news. You can just write news, and then it should open the news from your installed R version in the browser, and then you can look through the news. And I recommend everyone to do that once you update your R version and go through the list of changes, especially if you're a package developer. You can also, if you prefer to stay online, then on our project homepage, you can go to what's new and click here, changes in R, and then you get to the list of changes. Okay. We also have revived a news summary in the R journal. I'm not sure if you knew that. So the R journal has a special section called News and Notes, and there we have published this summary of changes in R, and this may also be useful to read, because it's a more it doesn't list all of the changes, but the most relevant ones with a bit more detail, and there also statistics on bug tracking. Last but not least, there's an R blog. So if you want to get hot news between releases about changes in the R double version, then you can go there, and there's also an RSS feed, and read about discussions about our core development. So now I'll present some of the main changes in R420. One affects only Windows. I can't say too much about that because I'm not using Windows, but I think it's a very important change for all those Windows users. There's now native UTF-8 support on Windows, which makes working with characters not representable in the system code page possible. For that, a new R2 chain has been developed, R-tools for 4.2, which targets the new Universal C runtime library in Windows, so in recent Windows. Another change which was also made is that the default user library is now in a hidden folder, which is usually used on Windows for such storage of apps. This was because previously the default user library was located in the documents folder, and that caused some problems with cloud storage services. I need to say that there are more encoding related fixes on Windows now in R421, and Windows users are recommended to update to that version. Then I think a very nice extension in the new version is with regard to the HTML documentation. Now the help system uses HTML5, and this is also validated. So the generated HTML is validated by a tool called HTML tidy if you run r-command check as run on your package. The HTML version now always can typeset LaTeX expressions, as is done in the PDF manual, and it supports code highlighting in the example section. So here you see on the bottom, you see you see for comparison the help page of the melanoma dataset from the lattice package in the HTML help. So previously, this is what it looked like, so no syntax highlighting. And on the right, we have the colors, and we also have a button to directly run the examples from that help page, which is also quite nice. I think an also important change is with regard to the checking of conditions. So imagine conditions should usually be of length 1, but if you had like this logical vector of length 2, true and false, probably because you made an error and did use that as a condition in if, then that worked. It will just use the first element of that logical vector and give a warning message. And this was the case since R170 and has now finally become an error in R420. So this is really to protect users and also developers from making coding errors. It's really, as far as I know, always was a coding error if that is now an error. Shouldn't happen. Similarly, you're now also protected. We are protected of errors in the use of the logical operators and or. So previously in R413, this silently worked also by using only the first element of this bad condition vector, and now that gives a warning. This warning message length equals 2 larger than 1 in coercion to logic. If you maybe you have already seen that. So this is then because you don't have just length 1 logicals in your expression. And it is intended that this will also become an error in the future. Okay, another change is with regard to simplify to array. A little bit of background. So that is a function which you may not have used directly, but it is used internally by sapply and mapply. And what it does is, so it says it simplifies to an array, so it simplifies a list to an array, but it doesn't do that always. So as you know from sapply, probably if you apply a function that returns scalar values, then the result will be a vector and not an array. This is often really useful to have. I think this is a useful behavior also for interactive use. So you can, for example, sapply on the vector of the month names, the number of characters function, and directly apply the summary function to get a summary of the number of characters in the month names, for example. Another exception to the simplification to array in sapply is that it doesn't simplify a list of length 0 values. This is probably less important, but it's also an exception from simplification to array. So what we have added now in the new R version is an argument to this simplify to array function called except, and you can set this to null to escape from these exceptions. So to always simplify to an array if possible. So if you have a list where the elements have a common length, then you want an array out of that. The default value would be 0 and 1. So except is 0 and 1, which means that this is this sapply behavior which does not simplify to an array for common length 0 and 1. So for example, now to compare, if you apply and lapply nchar to the month names, you get a list, of course, a list of length 1 values with the number of characters by name. And then if you then do the simplify to array, you get the vector. So this is the sapply behavior. But if you call it with except equals null, then you get the array, so the matrix actually. And similar for length for common length 0, this is not simplified by default. So you get the list, but if you use that except argument, you get a matrix. The new function syssetLanguage is, I think, very useful also for teaching, and so in interactive use, is intended to change the language of the messages during an R session. So if you get an error and it's translated to your language, your local language, then it's often, it's better to search for that as an error message in English in the internet. And you can do that now very easily. So here's an example. If you try to index the months function with an index of 1, so months is a function to extract the months from a date time class object, you get this message for me in a German locale Objekt des Typs Closure ist nicht identifizierbar. And so now you can set the language to English and store the current language, maybe run it again, and you get the English message, which you can now copy and paste to your favorite search machine and search engine, and then find explanations for this error, for example. R420 also has more classed errors. I think this is mostly useful for programmers, or also programmers of graphical user interfaces for R. For example, previously, if you so this error, which was thrown, object of type closure is not susceptible, was a condition object with class simple error, so which is the class the normal stop function throws. But now this type of error, object of type closure is not susceptible, it has a specific class. So the class not susceptible error, which means that you can handle that condition, that error condition specifically. For example, so this is just for fun, so you could define a global calling handler for that error class, which just prints, oh no, not again, whenever this error is thrown. So when that happens, now you get this this handler executed as well as the standard handler. There are a lot of other changes, and I'm not going to go into the details. Also, the new graphics engine features, for example, were already presented yesterday by Paul Morell, and there's also a blog post. These slides are available. I uploaded them to the conference platform, and there you can also then click on the links. There's a new function hashtag, which creates a hash table, and these are like similar to environments, but they can use more general types of keys, not just strings. Yeah. And matrix this is also to protect users from errors. So matrix is more once more when you enter the data you enter is longer than the dimensions, the product of the dimensions of the matrix, like in this case, then you get a warning that there may be a problem here. Also, the native pipe, if you use that, gained an extension to pipe the input to another argument than the first by using the underscore here as a placeholder. And finally, there has been a relaunch of the search engine behind the R function or site search, which is quite fast. So it allows you to search through all help pages of cron packages and through the R manuals. Okay. So now I want to show how to contribute to base R. I think first of all, if you plan to get involved, then I would recommend to subscribe to the R Devil mailing list, because then you learn how the R developers and also the developing community communicates and what the current problems are and so on. And I think the best entry point then is to analyze bugs on RSpexzilla. There's a blog post called R Can Use Your Help, Reviewing Bug Reports by Thomas Calibera and Luc Tierney from October 2019, which gives some tips on how to start with that. And that blog post was actually my motivation to kick off my contributions. And the advantage of these bug reports is that you don't, because R is like really huge, so the code base is so large, and I'm still learning all the time. I'm learning new parts of the code, and yeah. So I think with bugs, it's the advantage is that you are really focused on a particular problem, and you get to deal with a specific error message, for example, and a particular part of the code, and you can start studying that, and then learn the code base step by step. At the user 2 years ago, there was a very interesting panel discussion, and the recording is still available on YouTube, and I recommend, so if you're interested to get involved, I recommend to watch that. And from that panel discussion, here are some notes. I watched that a few days ago again, and here's a summary. So it was said that there's no formal procedure to join the R core team. So you just contribute, you keep contributing, and when then R core finds that you are doing a good job and you probably no longer need mentoring, then you get invited eventually. The distinguishing feature of RCore is that you can change the code base, of course. So in access to the write access to the SVN repository. And what is also true and was said there is that really most of the time is spent reading code. Because, as I said, it's such a large code base, and it's also quite complex, and so changing small parts may have a large effect on the existing code and existing packages. So that takes a lot of time also to debug potential breakage in packages if you change something in the code base. Someone also said at that panel discussion that RCore people do what they want to do and feel necessary to do. The important thing is they are qualified and do serious work at least periodically. And I think this is also quite true. And an important comment I want to make is that you don't need to be an expert in low-level programming to be to join RCore, if you like. So, for example, I'm also no expert at that level. I'm a statistician by training, and but it really, so I think RCore really needs some more that are experts at that level. Here's an overview of the Bugzilla statistics from last year. So there were 244 new bug reports or enhancement requests on RS Bugzilla. And when people open a new bug report, then they can select a category where this bug corresponds to, and the top 5 categories chosen were low-level language, documentation, MISC, and wishlist. And the same top categories were also in the year before. This was the same set. For wishlist, it's a bit special. So because you can, maybe also should, categorize a new bug maybe at the language level, and then you can also select a severity, and severity enhancement would be like a wish. 214 bugs got closed, and I want to say this doesn't happen only on weekdays, so this also happens on weekends, 40% on weekends. So it's like the frequency is halved, but still something is happening on weekends. And also comments on reports from the R community also happen during weekends. And this amounts to like 3 comments a day on average over the year. There were 115 contributors, so quite a lot. And I want to thank particularly Alan Waring, Sohato Angono, Michael Chirico, Henrik Bengtsson, Lionel Henry, Kevin Ashay, Andrew Simmons, and Duncan Murdoch for their contributions to RS Bugzilla in the last year. And so the question is, of course, now these 240 bugs closed last year, if we can beat that this year, where I just checked yesterday, we currently are at 97. If we look at the activity of new bugs and bug closures last year, we see that there's a slight increase at the end of the year. So if that happens this year too, or maybe after this conference, then I'm optimistic that we can beat last year's count. Okay, so now as a final part, I want to show some the process of some bugs which were closed. A lot of bugs, when I did the review in 2020, I found were actually already solved but not formally closed on Bugzilla. So an exercise also for starters, I think, is to find these bugs and find out in which version of R the bug has gone. You can do that by multiple ways. So, for example, scan the R news for a related entry, or find the part of the code which is affected and then use SVN annotate to see at which revision a change was made. You can also use these 2 mirrors for browsing the source code. And you can also install multiple versions, older versions of R, and see at which version this bug disappeared. Finally, when you have done that, you should inform RCore, comment on that bug report, as I did, for example, in one of those bugs in March 2020. I just wrote, this has been fixed in R340. This was a very old bug, and mentioned also the revision, the SVN revision, where the change was made, and the corresponding news entry, and then RCore people can check, can review, and really usually see very fast that check this fast, and then just close this bug. A particular bug I want to show is a stats bug, which I think is quite important because R is a statistical language in the end. So there was a bug in the log likelihood calculation for weighted NLS fits, which was reported quite verbosely in December 2014. Unfortunately, with a severity marked as an enhancement only, which I think is a bit wrong. And I found this was still reproducible in 2020, but had no comments in the Bugzilla so far. So I reproduced that and commented that I can confirm that this is wrong, and why this is wrong. I explained that, but this is not an easy bug, I think. So it needs a careful review of the code for the log calculation, also a review of the statistical methods actually. So it needs time, and in that case, it helps to provide really a detailed analysis and really also patches and test cases so that members of the core team can review that report. And sometimes also it needs a reminder to get that going. So in the end, this patch was applied, and there was a news entry then saying that this calculation is fixed. Another consequence much later was that I received an email from someone writing, I previously published a paper where the main analysis compared the BIC of a series of nonlinear least squares models, which are in R. When someone else tried to replicate my analysis, they produced different results, and so on. So that was, of course, because of that bug fix, and which shows that these have an impact, do have an impact. Relatedly, also statistics focused, there was a bug in NLME's LME function for mixed effects models. And the problem was that the LME fitting function never supported offset terms. It didn't claim it would, but people expected that it would, because it didn't throw an error. And we are used to specifying offset terms like this in linear models. So when you did that in older versions of NMLE, you just got, so it was just ignored silently, this offset term, and you got the same coefficient, the same parameter estimates for a model with and without an offset. And now this gives an error. And also here I received an email later asking, where someone asked whether he can trust the old results, or why why the support has been dropped. Also, so actually there never was support, and now you're protected from drawing wrong conclusions. Okay, so this is my last slide. I want to say again that R can use your help, and there are two things you can do related to these two blog posts I already mentioned. So, or maybe the first one I did mention. So you can do testing before release, because not all use of R is captured by automated tests, or can't be covered by that. So you really need to use R interactively to test some things, and it would be helpful if more people were doing that before the release. So testing the release candidates, the beta releases. And then, of course, help with the reviewing of bug reports, as I did 2 years ago. identify outdated, invalid reports, and also add reproducible examples if one is missing. And so those who want to get started with that, tomorrow there's a special event called Bug Barbecue, and here's the link to that, where we have collected a set of bugs in a GitHub repository for you to address, and there will also be members of the core team around in the Zoom rooms, Zoom meeting rooms, and then we hope that we can increase the number of closed bugs actually. So thanks to all contributors.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. I think you may have to close your screen so that we go away from that one. Yep. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see 2 questions were posted in the Q&A and already answered, not by me. One was borderline incomprehensible to me about how it would affect previous 32-bit Windows systems, and I guess to that the usual answer would be upgrade, or else you have to stay with it. So that's a little tricky. And the other one dealt with pipes and the named argument, but that has been covered. As such, I don't right now have any direct or further audience questions for you to link over from the talk. So thanks for the talk, and given that you already provided a nice link to the Bug Barbecue and contributing to R, maybe we can now open the session and invite Luke, Thomas, and Martin and start the panel part. We sort of have Martin here virtually, but I still see only the 4 of us. I think that maybe the case, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe if I can use the pause. There was one of the questions about 32-bit Windows, so we don't support them anymore. So if you really need 32-bit Windows, you will have to stick to, as it was answered, R4.13. But yeah, it was just too much maintenance work, and also there are the third-party libraries that are used by cron packages, and they are themselves, of course, large pieces of code that is not tested and maintained so well for 32-bit systems. So when I was building this R2 system, there were many more issues that would have to be solved for 32 bits than for 64. So we dropped it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the detail there. So with that, let me maybe very briefly introduce our panelists here. We have Thomas Calibera from Prague, Luke Turney from Iowa, and Martin Mechler, hopefully from somewhere in Zurich. We're still not quite sure whether he's here. We see him in the chat. He's clearly a audience member. We would also, of course, love to have him on the stage. But with that, maybe let me turn it to Luke and Thomas, who are here, and briefly start with really short bullet points about, what your role is in our core, what you focus on, and maybe as a little icebreaker, given the amazing 2,000 functions in base R, what your favorite underappreciated and unknown base R function is.
So I have no idea what my favorite underappreciated function is. Maybe I'll think of one later. So I tend to mostly work under the hood on internals of various kinds. bytecode compiler, for example, the memory management system, and the error handling system are things that I've written, which for the most part users don't tend to see directly. And if they see something directly, it often means I messed something up. So it's kind of under the hood a lot. But occasionally I do things that are a bit more visible. I was thinking for some reason about what of the things that people see, that I put in R, which is the most used. It's probably the double colon, the namespace system. That wasn't there until I decided to put it in, and it came from a Lisp system where I found it very useful. More recently, the pipe operator is something I put in the native one in a lot of collaboration with the folks at RStudio. It's kind of interesting. It's still to some degree evolving in that there's the simple pipe operator is a very straightforward thing. You pass something through the first argument. That's it. It's what if I don't want to put it in the first argument part where things start to get a little bit involved, and there's a balance there between making sure you don't inadvertently write something that makes no sense and doesn't get detected and gives you wrong answers, or gets detected and gives you a completely incomprehensible error message. So balancing that sort of thing. Also, I don't see that well anymore. Also, my screen is sometimes dirty. So having, like my gritter does, the single smallest glyph as the indicator of what's different about something that's usually not different, the period, the dot, is just really bad news for me. So making sure that when we start doing that placeholder thing, it's visible. That was a big goal of things that I looked at. So that's it for me.
Yeah, my favorite functions. I will speak about two. Also, as a developer who is working on R itself, I often abuse the internal inspect function. Right. So it's not for normal programming, of course not, but sometimes it's useful to find out what is going on under the hood. So you can call an internal function inspect on an R object, and you will find out what encoding it is in and what is the aliasing in the objects and things like that. And I also, when I need to debug something and call some function from R that I modify, I often change the inspect function, because it's not normally called in any code. So I will add my test code at the beginning of the inspect function in recompile R and then run inspect when I need it. So it's slightly primitive way, but yeah, that's what and something that probably people know, but it's very useful for debugging also is the trace function. Done by others. I'm just a happy user, and it can be used to add complicated triggers for breakpoints. So if you want to debug a function only under some circumstances, for instance, now I have been working on improving the encoding support in regular expression code, grep and so on. And I wanted to catch the situations when grep is being called with an argument that has bytes encoded string, right? So I just wrote a small R code that I, by the tracer, instrumented to the grep function. So the browser, the online debugger of R, will be executed when the function grep is called with such a string with bytes encoding, for instance. So you can do tricks like that, of course. Yeah. Well, and otherwise, I slightly change topics when working on R. It's almost 10 years actually. So I started on a project that was external, trying to implement R from scratch. And then it was about 2 years, and then I started fixing bugs And I started interacting with Luke and helping him with enabling the bytecode compiler. So it was already finished, but it wasn't on by default. And I have added some very small part, support for source references, so that the compiler keeps track of where the source lines of our codes are. I helped to find some bugs, but there were very few bugs there. But I spent a lot of time debugging R packages. The main reason why it wasn't enabled by default was that it wasn't working with some R packages, usually because they were doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so I spent a long time debugging packages, which is also, in general, I think most of the time spent on contributing to base R is debugging CRAN and bioconductor packages, which we use as a test suite, but it's also a service for the package maintainers. And then I was switching to different parts of base R where I saw that my help was most needed. So by large, I was suppressing my personal motivations. I would have loved to improve on the bytecode compiler, but it didn't need as much improvement as other things needed fixing. So for instance, there was nobody willing at that time to maintain the Windows-specific code. So I ended up doing something that nobody wanted to do. And yeah, fixing things on Windows, adding some new functionality on Windows, and fixing mostly encoding bugs on Windows, which seemed very, very common. And that also turned into this big project of enabling UTF-8 as the native encoding on Windows. Otherwise, I do some smaller things, like I think, yeah, you can see on the blocks. I did something with the sockets, something in the parser. Usually, these are low-level things that don't require statistical background, because that's not a background I have. I'm a computer scientist. So I think it's too long intro already. So
thank you. Sebastian, I don't know if you want to take the same question. In a way, your keynote, of course, already addressed that. So feel free to hop on that or off that. But I would have one question for you bubbling up now in the Q&A, where Hannah is asking what the difference between unlist and simplified to array is.
Yeah, well, the purpose of simplified to array, as the name suggests, is to get an array out of a list with elements of common length, and unlist would just squash all these elements into a vector usually. So that's the difference.
There's a, well, we're still, I think, waiting for Martin. There's one QA question that goes the direction of Luke, I guess, by Elio, about whether the native pipe will support the square bracket indexing operator, and if not, why not?
It might. This is something that Hadley and I have been going back and forth about. It depends to some degree on what you mean by supporting it. One thing that may be possible is to let you do underscore square bracket, and so that you're passing into the first argument. That's actually something that doesn't quite work consistently in Magrittr. You can do it one level, but you can't do it two levels. We could make it work. I'm still a little, in some ways, the hardest thing of doing it is explaining exactly under what conditions that works. It's not a named use that's easy, but it's not a top level use either. It's a very limited kind of top level use that's possible. We'll have to see whether the added complexity, it's a very small subset of cases where people will want to use it, but it adds complexity both to the code and to understanding what's going on. We have to figure out a lot of pipe work is really a balancing of those things. So it might come in. We'll see.
Yes, I'm a very modest user of pipes, but I really admire the base example of how it's, in its base case, just a simple composition, which one can show easily that it's just a rearranging of the arguments, which to me is on some level equivalent to how all function calls really are error assignments, so everything could be rewritten in infix notation. I mean, to some extent, it's just rearranging some things in the parser that remain the same, but I'm getting sidetracked. With apologies to Josh, I just hit a question that I wanted to answer in typing because it was a bit more borderline. That was where the funny names are coming from. Of course, we are June 23rd today, which is an R release day, and the funny names are, as I understand it, strictly the domain of the release manager, that is Peter, who goes to his large stack of peanut comics and finds something. But I think that's about accurate, but if someone else wants to.
Yeah, Peter had a presentation about these names in Brisbane, and I missed the presentation. And so I don't know more, but it should be easy to find it out. There are usually hidden jokes in every name that are related to what is currently going on in the world. So it's not just random.
Yeah, I'd second that. I mean, that gets us a little bit to governance and communication. It would actually be nice to hear more from our core at large. So maybe, maybe Peter, a quiet person as he is, should take to the blog more often and just write, or the mailing list, write about the naming. Sometimes the little stories even make sense. With that, we have a nice pivot. There's a longish question by Davor, who is asking about the borderline and interface between base R and packages, and if and when things happen and migrate from one to the other. That also crossed my mind because in the 20-25 years that I've been using R, we have seen very occasional, very conservative changes to the set of base and recommended packages. But one could see every now and then that some things could bubble up, maybe unit testing support in base R. I really admire how change management is undertaken by R core, about how the API is generally kept extremely stable and changes are communicated well. But could you foresee any extensions in the base and recommended set? If there were possible candidates for adoption and expansion, what would those be?
So this was discussed 2 years ago at the panel discussion as well. And there, the general idea was that probably there will be no more recommended packages actually, but it has happened in the past that new base packages appear. For example, the parallel package, as far as I know, has also been integrated into base R from contributed packages before. So I think it's not impossible, but it needs people in the R core team to somehow take care of that and maintain.
Absolutely, and there's a cost to maintenance and larger surfaces and interfaces. But to tie this over to one talk that I attended yesterday, where Hadley presented on the work of the OO working group and the possible R7 package, and an explicit promise of getting the package onto CRAN and maybe eventually into base R. There are a couple of coding conventions in the R7 package that are very natural for Hadley and the Tidyverse team, but less so for base R. Extensive use of Roxygen, test that, and all those other features which would present a gulf in the current version of the package. But just how, for example, the help system has changed with additional parsing, how the vignette system has very slowly changed from just supporting SWeave to more support of Markdown natively. There may be venues for expansion, but it's hard. Parallel is a good example. I think Stats 4 also was an example that initially wasn't there, but the Stats package, rather than expanding, was complemented by an additional base package. As an open-ended question for the two, and hypothetically 3 of you, if Martin ever joins us with a microphone, what are some governance issues about R-Core that you think the audience at large should know more about?
What do you mean by governance issues? So,
how work is divvied up, how decisions are made, how evolution happens. It's a extremely successful and influential open source project that brings joy and work to many of us, but it's also very, very unique in how it's set up and structured, and what insights can be gleaned or not. We have a few questions that bubbled up here in the Q&A. There were some more on the GitHub repo that I shared up belatedly yesterday, where someone is very explicitly asking, Python has a PEP mechanism, R has nothing. Would something like that help? And to me, that falls sort of in the broader structure of how can some of the internal deliberations shared more broadly with the world at large. We've clearly made good strides in that. The blog is excellent, but there may be 12 posts a year or something like that, maybe 15. Maybe more frequent communication would help. And any thoughts on that would be appreciated. It's a very open-ended and, of course, with that slippery question.
Yeah, I'm definitely planning to write more about the switch to UTF-8 that happened in the last 2 years. But otherwise, my experience is that the people in R-Core hate formalities, right, and bureaucracy, and they are usually professors, of course, who are interested in the real problems, very reasonable people. And the idea is that we have to find consensus on things. If it's difficult, we take a vote, but we try not to have to do that often. And so it means that whenever there is a change into the code, it should be something that the others are happy with, or at least agree with, right? So it is, of course, not the case that we would vote on every typo fix, of course not. But part of being in the team is that you learn to have some feeling for what the others can live with or not, right? So that you don't have to ask upfront. But it is not about that the new person who comes, or even old person, like who decides to just changes everything in a way that the others, hi Martin, that the others don't like, right? It happened to me some time ago when I was invited to R-Core and joined, and I got an email from someone I knew, and he said, "Oh, that's great! Finally, you are in. Now I will send you 100 patches, and you will just adopt them and change everything the way I want it, like that other guy." And, of course, that way you would not get very far, right?
Yeah, belated welcome to Martin Mechler, who has now joined us. So maybe he can catch up with the question we had on earlier. And very briefly, how long you've been with R-Core, what you typically focus on, and what your favorite underappreciated and less known function in base R is.
Yes, I've been there for a very long time. I've been with R-Core even before the name existed, similarly to Luke. So that was 1996 or so. Well, one under-known function that just came to my mind yesterday was the symnum function, symbolic numbers, which you see sometimes if you see the p-values encoded as stars, which of course some people don't like. So that actually uses this symnum function, but it's also used, for instance, when correlation matrices are mapped into symbolics, and you can use it everywhere. It's a standalone function that is relatively simply. I use it a lot also to kind of print logical vectors more compactly, where the false will get the dot and the true gets a bar. And so you can very easily see this 0, 1, yes, true. Okay, so this is a very simple function I added many years ago, and as I said, it's used in these cases. My topics are usually are most interesting are fixing hard problems in numerical accuracy. And yeah, that sometimes needs several iterations because many of the algorithms in R come from publications about how to do this and have been improved because the publications kind of, yeah, the algorithm worked for their cases or in some limited range. And then we found that they don't work when gone more specially. Okay, yeah, that's about all.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I glossed over with the intro. What I could have said at the beginning, of course, is that not everybody may know that Luke's contribution to statistical computing go way back further than R itself with XLib Stat. And I think one of your claims to fame, of course, is to convince R&R to make R a GNU project and get that started. So I think your starting point is earlier than the 1996 that you just gave. So for that, also kudos to you. We had one question I liked contributed over at GitHub, which basically asked what ACO would do if one person or one additional person could be hired to work on R full time. What do you think is a current roadblock that is sizable enough that it's being pushed down the road rather than being handled? And could resources help? With my, our foundation board hat on and the treasurer's report in mind, of course, we'd always be happy to help, but resourcing is not always as simple as just making manpower available. But if you had a magic wand, what work would you like to be seen next? And maybe we can make this round robin, because I'm sure you have different perspectives on that.
Yeah, so Martin, you, or should I start?
Go on.
Okay, so I think that first it would be great to have someone full-time working on the base R. Then I think it is not realistic that someone new would come and implement some major new feature. I had that ideas also when I was joining, but it's naive, right? Like you need to know the code very intimately. You also need to know the people much more and so on. So I don't think it's a good start, but we definitely need someone more. And naturally, such person would be also fixing bugs, right? And improving things like those that are somehow in my reach are related to the encodings, and something that is not in the base R code, but also is taking a lot of now my time is maintaining the libraries for R tools, right, or MXC, and so there would be an easily separable group of tasks. So I think it would be a separate question. What should be the big things that would be changed in R, but people should not expect that they would be able to come and make major changes to the base. That's my.
Yeah, I think in terms of something you could, I mean, if you hire someone, especially someone who's from a computer science background, you're not going to keep them around long term. They're going to move on to other things. So you get as much as you can out of a period, and give them things that maybe you could replace them on. Supporting the binary side of things would probably be the best thing to farm out to someone like that. So what Tomasz was talking about, right now, Szymon Urbanek's doing the Mac side, but if he decides he wants to do something else, the same issues there. In the Linux world, binary support has been taken over by others, including, of course, you, Dirk. We're doing it for Windows, and it's not really our strength as a group. I mean, Tomasz has done marvelous things, and so has Szymon, but that would be one of the few things I would think could be solved by people money, or at least helped with. Other kinds of things, it's not quite clear that would be the right way to get moving. If I think about the one bigger project I know we need to grapple with sometime, it's making it easier to work with integers that are more than 32 bits on their own, as well as in interfacing to linear algebra code. That's a big project. It's really hard to see how we can get someone from the outside to jump in on that. And a lot of it is not really about the technical doing it. It's about, it would be easy if we were rewriting something from scratch, but the fact that we want to keep 20,000 packages alive means it's not. And that's my.
Yeah. Yeah, you had a great conference talk on that a year or 2 or 3 ago, and one of the venues was maybe not straight up in 64 as I remember, but sort of some approximate large integers, which gets us somewhere but not somewhere else. I do recall some earlier discussions about the limited number of bits in the SEXP that make adding base types hard. But yeah, this is an issue that does come up. Working with the in64 package is sort of a fudge. We don't even have a uint64 package, but that's definitely an open issue. But I don't want to monopolize this. Sebastian, Martin?
Yeah, somewhat related to what Luke said, is also there is modern approaches to matrix linear algebra stuff. For instance, I just saw an announcement on the Numerical Analysts Net newsletter about arbitrary precision LAPACK called MLAPACK that they make available, and it's based on the same GNU MPFR library, which I also wrote an R interface package to. I'm pretty sure, and I have heard, people have requested from me as a maintainer of the R MPFR package, couldn't we make matrix stuff also high precision, because there are some problems where double precision is not enough themes. And even if you know, sometimes you can write a better algorithm, but sometimes this is hard. Anyway, so this would be related in the same sense as you would somehow want to integrate more general number types into the language, similar to what I think Julia has achieved very nicely in some sense. Their number type is very general, and they can add new number types relatively easily.
Yeah, we have, of course, a different starting point with one int32
yes.
and one float 64, but that's an issue. Yes, sometimes that comes up every now and then, of course, is more native sparse matrices. Maybe it's hard because the core is limited, and by and large, the package extension mechanism is tremendous and very powerful. And in the past, when these questions were raised, most often the answer was just, this doesn't belong in or you often say that on the mailing list. I think that's one of your standard replies, for which you probably have an Emacs shortcut that, if you can handle it with an add-on package, it doesn't belong in base. And that's still pretty true.
Yeah, but these things are related. For instance, I just had a conversation actually with Robert Gentleman. He was visiting Zurich just a week ago, going to Bioconductor conference in South Tyrol, and he mentioned that again, matrix indices must be allowed to be really large, and the matrix package at the moment still doesn't even allow our long integer. Our double precision viewed as integer indices, and even less the 64-bit, which in principle are allowed from the underlying library, C library that does all the sparse. Yes, there is some development going on, but actually it's in package space, right? It's a recommended package, but it's only in package space anyway. But there are limitations to BaseR which make it hard to kind of improve there on the package space. But of course, Luke does know that, and we all know that it's kind of, yeah.
If I can say something more, like there is a smaller than a whole year of full-time person, but still a project that would help and that could be easily externalized. And this is TRE. It's a library for regular expressions. R uses two of these, like it uses TRE and PCRE2, and they are different, right? And the TRE has some features that PCRE2 doesn't, like approximate matching. And then we have this package space that ended up using the regular expressions exactly as provided by TRE. So it really helps if we can keep TRE in. It helps the users mostly, right? It would be easier for us to say, oh, we drop it and you have to rewrite your packages so that they work with PCRE2. The problem is that TRE is not maintained anymore, right? It's an open source project on GitHub. The maintainer has been looking for a replacement for years, and we have been fixing TRE that we have in R, but we have been fixing only the most important bugs, but also the bugs that were relatively easy to fix, mostly Brian, not me, but still. And there are some important bugs in there as well, like the engine is not interpreting some regular expressions correctly, and that would require a person with very good programming skills in C, but it doesn't require knowledge of R at all. So it's something that could be done by a programmer that can be bought with money. And if they could fix all the bugs that have been reported, that would be already helpful, incorporating our own fixes. And of course, if someone wanted to maintain it and take over the maintenance of that project, it would be even better, and it could go in this order, I believe. And it would help us maintaining R as well.
Thanks for that. Back to package space, Henrik wrote a question in the Q&A asking why recommended is still there as a label or level for packages, given that otherwise we have base R and then a flat package space on CRAN.
The maintenance is much more related to base R, and changes in base R are also related to the recommended packages in the sense that they are really checked a lot. But then, of course, for some of them, they are not really important anymore. I can mention the other one I maintain, the cluster package, which used to be very state of the art 20 years ago, and is, interestingly enough, still not completely out-fashioned, but yeah. The question is, the advantage of recommended packages is that they can be maintained by people outside of the core. At the moment, there are not many of those, right? There is the survival package, which I think is still maintained by Terry, and the MGCV, also very important package by Simon from Britain. And all the others are maintained by our core members anyway. Yeah, it would be also a lot of work to kind of disentangle all that, because I think it's a waste of time to do that.
Yeah, it's a fair point. This shows once again that the looser coupling of a tight core and a package extension mechanism allows easy association through time, where certain algorithms may be state of the art for a decade, and given the lifespan of R in multiple decades, may phase out. Maybe cluster gets replaced by newer algorithms in that case, and or other things. But yes. One question came on by David about, well, how do you actually work on this? What's your favorite IDE or editor? And as I'm here, I may of course ask, why is its name Emacs?
It's true for Sebastian and me, I think. I'm not sure about Luke or even Thomas.
Yeah. Sebastian gave it away during the slides with VC-annotate, so of course that works. I also know Git from Emacs, but it's not for everybody. Do I hear with horror then that Thomas is not an Emacs user? Man.
No, I'm not. We have a Czech joke. It is hard to translate, but still, the question is like, do you know what is the best editor, right? And the response is Vim, which means I know in Czech, right? So I'm using Vim to edit the C code because it's easy for me to set up the indentation, which is slightly complicated for the C code. And I use Joe for other code. It's a WordStar based editor because we use other indentation style in other files. And I don't think it's at all important.
I agree on that.
Yeah, I don't use the Emacs to read my mail, but I do most other things in Emacs. So.
One question that came actually as the first one over at the GitHub repo was more open-ended and broad-based in the direction of the contributor working group and the bug barbecue. So what advice would you give to young and aspiring R enthusiasts for contributing, keeping contributing, and growing as contributors?
I think, I said some things during my talk. So my impression is that it's, fixing, analyzing bugs is the best start you can do. So this is interacting with R core directly, and you get to know the code base step by step. I think this is a very good start, and it really helps also to improve R.
I think there is the general principle of the added value, right? I'm also in this position actually, because when maintaining R, I end up finding bugs in other software, and I'm reporting the bugs upstream. So lately, I reported a number of bugs to GCC, for instance, but other projects as well. And so I also have this other experience, and the experience is that if you are asking someone else to spend time on you, right? Like as a GCC developer of the GCC itself, I'm a complete newbie, of course. Like what I'm sending could be usually nonsense, right? So I'm trying very hard to make sure that there is some added value, even given my very low experience with that system. Right. And I think that this is like the key that it can work with the limited resources that the projects like GCC or R have on the maintenance. So I think that for people who want to contribute to the bug reporting, it's important to find out a bug where they actually can help, even with what they know. It cannot be any bug. I cannot myself contribute to any bug, right? I only can do some, and so I think it's the case for most people who are not engineers. So just choose something where you can contribute, and then spend a lot of effort, right? Doing your homework, like reading the documentation, reading the source code, finding out something new before you write the comment. And for instance, Sebastian is one of the people who got this somehow naturally, and from the beginning, his reports were very useful, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we are getting a lot of comments that are not useful at all. Like people are trying to help, of course, but they are just writing comments without studying, without understanding the problem. And they just end up sending a naive question or naive suggestion to 20 people in our core, and that doesn't help. So I think the focus is important, and the principle of doing your homework and trying to already be useful. And I'm trying to do the same with GCC, for instance, right? So I would spend several days on one comment, or to make sure that it's useful. And when you do this, it's rewarded, right? Like recently, there was a bug in GCC that they fixed within 1 day, right? Brian and Kurt found a problem by testing packages. I think Kurt found out, Brian debugged to a function, and I have reported in a lot of detail, like to GCC, and it was just miscompiling code, like a very serious problem. And we reported it so well that they fixed it within 1 day, and they were happy, of course.
Right.
And yeah, this is how.
Yeah, it's a hard problem with the on-ramp, of course, to go from not contributing to be at the level that the contribution is so high level that you can just integrate it next. Yeah, it takes effort and I guess trials. Related to that, we have 2 more open questions that bubbled up in the Q&A. Tim was asking / suggesting that, as I said earlier in passing, that maybe the blog could be used more to show some highlights of ongoing work and what is going on. And Paola is appreciative of how Sebastian walked us through some changes in the recent R release and highlighting those. So I second that. Maybe sometimes it's just enough to record a cool video of 5 highlighted features in the most recent release. Just throw some balls in the air, get some conversations going, and engage with users. I see we have 4 or 5 minutes left. I have another one of these open-ended questions related to development at current version and most previous versions. For us, interfacing with R via the package management system, the effective sort of yes-no barrier is that CRAN tests against current and previous releases, which seems not very long and deep. And while I was sort of thinking about that, how I would ask that question, it becomes clearer that your record of what is supported is actually much, much stronger, because old code in base R and R itself, and not possibly changing packages, is famously stable and runnable years later. But do you have a particular view on sort of breadth, all the packages, 20,000 approaching, versus depth about code having to work on older versions? I believe the Tidyverse team makes it explicit and promises that 4 old versions run against it. That is, by manpower, not a service that CRAN can offer, because they don't have 4 entire instances. But any views on that topic? And again, I should postfix that with the fact that I remain tremendously appreciative of what I find unparalleled support for continuity and compatibility. R just doesn't change and break in general. Change is communicated extremely carefully and extremely well, to the extent that we're now still getting the occasional mailing as to Stack Overflow comment on the 3.6 change in the random number generator that someone runs about. That only happened once in 20 years is a tremendous achievement. But with that, back to you guys about any views on that topic at large.
My impression has been that the dependencies of old stuff no longer being reproducible was really much more within package space than with respect to base R, similarly to what you said, Dirk. And so, of course, there are all these systems of packrat and whatnot. But the typical user, using packages with 40 or 50 other packages in the dependencies, as it is now, when you use certain tidyverse packages. And I'm not targeting those. They're probably better interdependent. It's really hard. I mean, sometimes it's it's one of the packages is linked to an external C library or to a geographical something library, and that old version is no longer compilable with modern GCC because blah blah blah. Basically, the user cannot. In those cases, it may be just one of these libraries that are no longer. The 3-year-old version is no longer compilable with the current C compiler and libraries. That has been a rare experience by me, but I'm not the user. That I'm usually happy to reproduce base R stuff, but yeah, there are others.
Yeah, well, the advice for package authors who want their packages to be compatible for a long time is of course, don't use native code. And do defensive programming as much as you can. So only relying on the documented behavior and behavior that makes sense and so on. But in principle, it's very hard, right? Because you don't know what will change, right? And actually, I think that this is overrated slightly, right? Because it may also be that we are not changing R enough, right? So for instance, with this activity on Windows, like that we have changed things and UTF-8 is now the encoding and so on, it's more likely that some of the new packages will take advantage of that and not work on previous versions of Windows, and it's not a bad thing, I think, right? So I think it's important that the packages work on the versions of R for which they are written and for which they are declared to work on. And inversely, there is a lot of effort spent on R working, for instance, with newer compilers. It's mostly Kurt and Brian doing a lot of testing with new compilers so that the R, when it's going to be released, will already be compilable with the newest Clang and newest GCC and so on. And this is something that doesn't come by coincidence, but thanks to mostly Brian Ripley.
Yeah.
And,
no, it's tremendous work, and it's tremendously valuable to get these things, and even the small stuff. I mean, the recent extern change in the C library a year or two ago before the compiler posted, and the support for LTO, it's really good, and it's good to have the corpus of packages on CRAN as a test basis to be able to assess what effect any and all changes may have. But of course, given that I have you here sort of with Team RCPP's head on, I have to formally protest against this dismissal of code. Both you and Luke did that once in a user session we were all in a couple of years ago, and I will stand by and defend the use of native code, as R itself does in base packages. The fact that we can go from the interpreter very, very cleanly to C extensions, which are so portable and compilable, is I think still a tremendous strength, and the interface is very stable too. But I digress. We're being signaled that the time's up, or at least the running timer come to 0. So maybe with that a closing round, a couple of words from each of you, sort of summarizing a takeaway message from the session.
So I just want to say that I think these panel discussions, they are a nice thing to have. I myself enjoyed the panel discussion 2 years ago when I wasn't a member of our core team, just to get to know the people, to see what they are talking about and so on. So I think it's nice that we do this.
Yeah, and obviously it would be nice to get more people like Sebastian, like this way, right? We need more people to contribute, and clearly there has been a description of a way that is appreciated, that works, and that is very useful, and more people can follow that way, and it would be nice.
There is one thing coming to my mind that actually Hadley wrote in his book, in the first edition of Advanced R. He said, if you want to become good in programming with R or anywhere, you should address programming with a scientific mind. Do experiments, try to kind of design something, an experiment, like a statistician, make the experiment, draw conclusions, and go. And that's an attitude which I think is very good, and I don't see so often in current Bugzilla commenters, or that's at least, and I've seen some, and Sebastian was one of the example who exactly took this approach. I'm very careful. I don't draw a conclusion from one example. I try different things. I look at the source code. I read the documentation. So that's an approach that I like. Science, if you want to be data scientists, be really a scientist-like mind rather than just an engineer who tries things. And if it works for my case, then I sell it. Don't use this approach.
Well, if nobody else wants to jump on that slippery banana, I think it comes back to me as session chair to thank all of you, and in particular Sebastian, for his very illuminating keynote. And I thank you for the time and contributions to this panel discussion, and of course to all of R itself. And with that, my thanks and regards to everybody in our core. Thanks all.
See you.
Bye.
Goodbye.